How many of you have heard of a phrase called the God of the gaps? God of the gaps. Ever heard of that? Nobody. Okay. So the God of the gaps theory is a theory that goes as follows. 6,000 years ago at the dawn of humanity, or human civilization, I guess if you want to call it, people turned upwards to the sky, and every once in a while they would hear these incredibly loud sounds and watch these streaks of light appear across the sky. And of course, they hadn't developed the understandings of electromagnetism yet at all, and they didn't know how negatively charged ions line up in the atmosphere during a storm to create an electrical current. So they looked up at the sky and they said, "This is the thunderbolt of Zeus." That's what it is. So the God of the gaps theory basically says that whatever we cannot explain, we ascribe to God. We say, oh, that must be God, right? We don't know how, I don't know, people are born. God is the creator of humanity. We don't know where the universe came from. God is the creator of the universe. But the problem with that is that eventually, once you develop modern theories of science, then we know that human beings are born out of fertilized embryos. We know that the universe came out of a singular Big Bang event, which is now being disputed, but okay, for argument's sake. We can eventually explain everything according to science, so that now the realm of God gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So there is even an argument against this idea that Elle is saying, which is that we need faith, because faith can't explain everything. So what do you say to that? Yeah.
I don't think that's the realm of God getting smaller. I just think that that's us having a deeper understanding of God's creation.
Great, okay, fine. So you'll say, okay, fine. So God uses the human embryos to create humanity, and God uses the laws of physics, yes, but eventually we see the world becoming more and more demystified. We are less and less baffled by what's going on in the world. And eventually, if we can come up with a scientific explanation for everything, so why do we need God anymore?
Just because we have a scientific explanation doesn't mean it makes sense.
Oh, okay. What's your name?
Dahlia?
Dahlia. Okay. So we can come up with scientific explanations for almost everything. And yet, Dahlia says, we still need something called faith. Fantastic. Dahlia, can you please read the next source on the sheet by Rabbi Sachs in a phenomenal book on the relationship between science and religion called The Great Partnership? Highly recommend it. Okay, so Rabbi Sachs addresses this problem head on. He says, it would seem that faith is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It would seem like faith is unnecessary today, and yet, he says, faith is alive and well. There are as many people in the world today, if not more, who have ever existed, who still have something called faith. So why is that? Because science can't answer every question. Science can answer the how, maybe the what, not the why. Not the why. And he addresses three questions. Who am I? Oh, I'm a multi-celled organism whose brain is run through electric currents in the neurons, which sends signals to the nervous system, which creates reflexes in the muscles and the skeleton. No. Who am I? Who am I? Who is the I? How is it that this bundle of neurons can actually even ask a question like that? Why am I here? Why am I here? What do you mean, why are you here? You're a complex organism. You're here to reproduce and survive and perpetuate the future of the species. No. Okay, maybe that's part of who I am on a larger scale, but why I'm here is so much deeper than this kind of survival mode. And where am I going? Where am I going? And that's something that really separates us from the animals, right? The animals are not future-oriented beings. in the sense that they ask. I always found that it was the funniest thing in the world at the beginning of the movie Ratatouille. You have this rat, this very pensive rat, like, isn't there more to life than just looking through garbage cans? Said no rat ever, because there's a rat. A rat will accept its environment, and it will either thrive or not, but it will never wonder, is there something more? So these are the questions that still perpetuate, and it starts to force us to ask, okay, how do these questions relate back to our definition of faith? If this is the link that Rabbi Sacks is drawing between faith and these questions, so then maybe it doesn't have so much to do with the idea of believing something without evidence. Why am I here and who am I? It doesn't even make sense to ask the question, what evidence do you have? What do you mean? These are natural existential questions that I think about, depending on how overthinky you are, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Every now and then I ask myself, like, why am I here? And that has nothing to do with evidence. There are simply questions that cannot be answered, given the available scientific knowledge. And no amount of scientific knowledge can ever answer that. In his book, Rabbi Sacks has this great line, which he repeats multiple times. He says, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts things together to see what they mean. So catchy, I remember it after years of having read the book. So we want to know why. How do we make sense of this? What's it all for? And those are the questions that we begin to associate with faith. And is that a surrender of reason? No, not at all. There's a guy, his last name is, I'm blanking on his last name. He's a modern physicist who, at a certain point in his career, was considered maybe like the next Darwin. They said he was the next Darwin. Why? Because he had developed an experiment that showed how inorganic matter can actually self-assemble to become organic matter. Now, the reason why that's so important is because that's one step before the how we could possibly explain how life came to be in a universe, right? Because everyone wants to know, how do you get from just carbon and hydrogen and oxygen into some sort of conscious being that reproduces and moves and wants to use energy, right? All of these things that we associate with living organisms. And so this physicist, he was a biologist, I guess. He came up with a way to show that not that you could get life, but that you could get these atoms that turn into things like enzymes and amino acids, things that are necessary for the basis of life. And people were calling him like the next Darwin. Now, it happens to be that this guy is a religious Jew, Orthodox Jew. And they asked him, does this not challenge your beliefs? And he said, absolutely not. I want to figure out how God made life. But this doesn't tell me why God made life. So it doesn't change in any way my relationship to why I need something beyond what I can observe through a microscope to be able to ask deeper questions. So that's how Jonathan Sacks understands it. Similarly, the Chazon Ish. Have you ever heard of the Chazon Ish? Yeah? Big rabbi in Europe who moved before the Holocaust to Israel, and he's the one who really built up Bnei Brak. He was considered one of the absolutely one of the greatest rabbinic minds of the 20th century. And the Chazon Ish has a whole book called Emunah Ubitachon, a really beautiful book. And towards the beginning of the book, he says something so poetic. If a person is in touch with their soul, and they have a moment of tranquility, free from the burden of desires, and their eyes dazzle from the spectacle of the heavens above and the depths of the earth. You look around at this incredibly exquisite world, and you are moved, not just by the complexity of mitochondria, but simply by the beauty of a sunset. They become excited and astonished, for the world appears before them as a mysterious riddle, concealed and wondrous, and this riddle surrounds their heart and mind, and they're like one who is bewildered. No breath of life remains within them, except for their entire focus and purpose being directed towards the riddle, and the knowledge of its solution consumes their soul. I think what the Chazon Ish is describing is this why. There's a feeling which he's describing, and it's a feeling called awe. A-W-E, awe. Awe is what happens when you apprehend something that's greater than you, much greater than you, something that's beyond comprehension. And this is not the God of the gaps. This is not like, oh, eventually, you know what it's like? It's like looking at the most beautiful sunset. You're like, I'm just awestruck by that. And somebody else says to you, well, what are you talking about? I can tell you the frequency of the wavelength of the colors of orange and pink and yellow that are contained in that sunset. So what's so elaborate about it? It's like, I'm sorry, buddy, but something's being lost in translation here. You're talking about measuring waves, and I'm beholding a sunset that takes my breath away. No amount of measurement of waves will make me not have awe at a sunset. That's what the Chazon Ish is getting at. So we start to see again that there is something else, something besides the God of the gaps, and something besides what we might even call reason. How would Christopher Hitchens respond to this idea? You who are marveling at a sunset, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, isn't it? I can tell you the measurement of the waves. I can tell you what's going on in your brain to produce some feeling of reverence. And you're like, yes, but isn't it quite interesting that I find myself here at this point in this time, that I'm experiencing such a moment of awe? No amount of brain chemistry can tell me what the experience is, can demystify the experience. I think we sometimes have that problem in the 21st century, is that so many things are explained away that we've kind of demystified the world itself. So we no longer tap into those moments of awe because we've been like, I live in a Western, progressive, modern society. Like, I don't need to be wonderstruck anymore.